I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order, please. Steve, would you help us with our pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item is adoption of agenda. Superintendent, any changes?
There are no changes.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the agenda for Monday, October the 15th be passed and adopted as presented and recommended.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. We have an agenda and our board president here, so. Mr. President, we are at call to the public.
All right, thank you. Sorry I was late.
1 minute late.
1 minute late. Do we have any requests?
I don't
No
believe.
written requests?
I don't believe we have any requests.
All right. Next item, I think, is board. Let's see. Governing board updates. Hector?
No update, Mr. Chair. No report.
Right. Marcy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to report that I attended the county workshop of the Arizona School Boards Association along with Mr. Morales. And I want to thank Mr. Harry Claypeck from Rio Rico School District was reelected as our director for the county. And I want to especially thank all those administrators and assistant principals who took the time to spend their holiday there with us. And you really added a lot. The new executive director, Dr. Tom Olga, was very impressed that you attended, participated. So I really want to thank you for attending because you were instrumental in making our workshop a success. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next item, superintendent's report. Steve?
Item A is a recognition, and it should be Kevin Castro. And Kevin had has a commitment to the band. He won't be here this evening. But I'm going to go ahead and say something anyway. And if you can come at a future date, certainly welcome. Kevin has been commended in the 2013 National Merit Scholarship Program for placing among the top 5% of more than 1.5 million students who took the preliminary SATs, which is quite impressive when you think about it. Give you an idea where he stands in his graduating class. Currently, he's number 2. Yes. So we like to, give him some praise and for the good work that he has done through probably his entire career, but especially during his last 4 years. And item B and C, the activities and auxiliary operation funds and the summary budget report are before you as well. And that's the end of the report.
Any comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Superintendent Zimmerman. I noticed that on account 210, the high school, the class of 2012 overspent $1,300. How are you planning on recuperating $1,300 from students who have left? And I don't even know how they overspent because they're supposed to give them purchase orders for only money that they have.
Thank you for your question, Dr. Varona, members of the board. We are looking into that. That was one of the deficiencies that we had in our audit, and we are planning on making a correction in that account. But we need to work closely with Nogales High School in order to make that correction. I suspect it's just a coding error that needs to be made within our accounting system, and it will be corrected by the next month.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
No more comments? Next item, discussion information, 2013-14 budget forecast presentation.
This is, Carla's going to do a presentation. I'm going to give you some copies. This is certainly nowhere near a home run. We are just sort of taking a look so far in advance, sort of make you think about a few things. For instance, I'm hoping that the public, as they watch this, that they see probably the importance of Proposition 204. Because this is one of these budgets where it can be a little bit frightening. We're not as bad as the last couple of years in terms of a loss of enrollment, but still we are losing a few kids. So what we thought we would do months in advance is sort of give you a flavor of what it could look like. So certainly not anything that we'd like to have published in the newspaper, because people will run with that as if it is the budget for the next year, but we're going to do it anyway and do a quick presentation and sort of give you a flavor. I'll hand out the copies that Carla put together. We put this on the agenda very late, just because we've been thinking about it. We thought about not even doing it this early, but we changed our mind and decided to do it anyway. So, Carla?
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and members of the Nogales community. We are doing tonight fiscal year 2013-14 budget forecast, and like Mr. Zimmerman said, it's not a home run. There's a lot of assumptions being made in this presentation, so please bear with me. The first slide that I have for you here is just a historical perspective on the district budget. And as you can see, I've given you a 6-year analysis of what the budget has been since 07-08. The numbers on the right represent millions of dollars. So in fiscal year 07-08, we were about $61 million. And then we declines slightly in 08-09, 09-10, 10-11. So down to 12-13, the budget is $12,783,000 less than what it was in 07-08. I did put together a little bit more information on there so that you can see, for example, in the area of M&O, that's highlighted shaded in blue. The capital funds are shaded in red. The grants are your green section. The classroom site fund is the purple section, and you can see a decline in years 10-11 and 11-12, and I'll explain that a little bit later on in the presentation. And then the other funds are shaded in the turquoise blue. Most of our decline in our budget, as you well know, has been a decline in our ADM. I know that you've seen this chart many times. The last number that I have for you there is a little bit of good news. In fiscal year 12-13, we expect our ADM to increase approximately by 50 students, 50 or 60. So again, this is just an estimate based on our 40th day count, which was last week. But as you can see in 0001, we were at 6,112 students, and now we're about 5,500 ADM. Oh, there we go. Okay, this is information that we received from ASBO, the Association of School Business Officials, and they did a study as far as the impact to school funding for fiscal year 12-13, and it would be the impact from budget cuts and elimination of funding components. So as you can see, the first and foremost there is elimination of full-day kindergarten funding, about $218 million statewide. This was eliminated since 2009-2010. So again, this slide only represents the cuts for this fiscal year. So as you can see, cumulative would be a lot more. The reduction of soft capital and capital outlay funds statewide stands about $239 million. And this reduction also took place last fiscal year in 11-12. The suspension of base level inflation funding, over $360 million there. There has been no increase to the base level since 2008-2009. The suspension of building renewal formula, over $200 million statewide there, and this reduction has also been in place for several years. And then the last two items are not pertinent to our district: the elimination of JTED 9th grade student funding, $29.7 million. And the phase out of career ladder programs throughout the state for $22.6 million. So the suspension and or elimination of funding, including the lack of any funding adjustments for inflation to the operational funding formula, have impacted schools in Arizona by over $1 billion this year alone. So what does this mean to our school district? So the impact to NUSD, the elimination of full-day kindergarten, it's about $1 million there that we were receiving back. So if we calculate it with today's ADM and today's funding level, that amount would be about $999,000. The reduction of soft capital and capital outlay is about $1.6 million reduction to our budget. And again, like I mentioned before, this reduction was also in place in 11-12, and that reduction was $1,947,000. The suspension of base level inflation funding, that's over $1.9 million for our district. And again, no increase to the base level. We were guaranteed through Prop 301 years ago. We would get either a 2% increase or the inflation, the cost of inflation increase. So again, assuming that we would be receiving a 2% increase since 2008, 2009, we would see our budget increase by about $2 million. The suspension of building renewal formula, and that's over $700,000. This was cut by 50% in 07-08 and eliminated thereafter. And then, like I said before, the elimination of JTED and career ladder programs are not pertinent to our school district. But overall, these cuts represent about $5,275,000 this year alone for our school district. Questions so far? Not mentioned in the previous slide is your classroom site fund, and I know that we've talked a lot about classroom site fund, Prop 301. This started back in fiscal year 2002. The highest we ever saw in funding was in fiscal year 2008 when we received $397 per weighted student count. The districts had been allowed to spend to the estimate, but through the years, a cumulative shortfall was reduced. As of fiscal year 2010, the total shortfall was $195 per student. So the state had to adjust this shortfall in fiscal years 11 and 12, which explained the reduced budgets that I explained in the first slide. And the allocation was reduced each year by $120. The district carryover in that fund was used to maintain stable payments to teachers for those 2 years. The new rate is established by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee each year by March 31st. And again, it's really early for us to speculate what that amount will be for next year. And the new funds, any new funds established by this rate and carryover are used to calculate the Prop 301 payments to teachers, including performance pay. And the current rate is $227. So some of the items that impact our budget, like I mentioned before, your base support level, that no increase in the last 4 years, soft capital funding, capital outlay funding, the classroom site funding, your average daily membership, your teacher experience index, carryover funds, and your Prop 301. So again, for the forecast, you'll see a lot of question marks here, because at this point in time, we don't know if there will be a base level increase. However, with our ADM increase in Group A count, about 49 students, we would look at an increase in our budget about $225,000. Group B, again, we don't have any firm counts for that or ELL. And without knowing our base support level, we cannot make an estimate as far as an override limit. The teacher experience index is driven from a report that is uploaded to the state. I believe that was uploaded today. So once we have better numbers, we'll know what our experience index will be. The budget balance carryover, however, and again, this is a very rough estimate, but I anticipate having a carryover of $400,000. And as you know, the current carryover, our goal was to carry over $1 million from last year to this year's budget. The current carryover is $950,000. So again, without that high carryover, there will be some reductions that will need to be made in the budget if we don't incur any sort of increase in funding. And the next two items are soft capital and unrestricted. Again, we don't know if those will continue to be reduced. And the last number, Prop 301, again, there's no number there, as we don't know what the funding level for that will be. Some of the future considerations. One, the 1 cent sales tax that's currently in place ends this fiscal year, in June 30th. And the revenue in that, from that 1 cent sales tax was about $1 billion. Not all of the $1 billion were going to education, so it's important to note that. The K-12 rollover will most likely continue. Again, statewide is about $1 billion. The suspended funding formulas that we previously mentioned, about $1 billion, which will include the base support level, full day kinder, building renewal, and the capital fund reductions. And then the increased cost to the state from the assessed valuation decline. And again, I think that's leveling off. It won't be as it was in the last 2 years. But again, as you know, that it creates an increase in our local tax rate, and the perception is that the higher taxes will be imposed. Next, I'd like to ask our Grants Director, Ms. Kathy Scott, to talk a little bit about our grants.
Okay. Carla asked me to prepare this slide because this could be the #1 impact on all federal funding. The word is sequestration. And Mr. Addenda, I used to think that that was when you had a jury and you put them in isolation so they would not be affected by the media. I'm thinking that perhaps they picked that word so that Congress could not be affected by the media, because the purpose was in August 2011, Congress got into what they call a debt agreement, that they would cut $1.2 trillion from the federal budget. And if it was not cut, starting in January, they would cut 9% from every federal fund other than Social Security, Defense, and Medicare. Well, we get over $6 million in federal grants. So to us, just our district, if this goes through, our money this year would be cut $600,000, right, mid-year, okay? My understanding, I've gone to many workshops put on by the state. Some people said, don't worry about it. If it is cut, we won't start until next year. Some people say, do worry about it. I think the #1 concern is nobody knows. Nobody understands, because until November 6th, whether this will be enforced, whether there will be an agreement, depends on who in Congress is elected or re-elected and what they vote to do. I did get an email from one of the people at the State Department today that they are enforcing the 15% carryover rate. We have, for a number of years, been able to carry over more than 15%, and they say that this year they're going to hold us to it in Title II at least. I don't know about anything else. And any monies they recapture, they're going to use at the state level because their funding is so low. Are there any questions on sequestration? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. And the last slide that we have for you is on Proposition 204. Proposition 204 would extend the 1 cent sales tax and direct 80% of those monies to public education. If passed, approximately $1 billion that it would generate, the monies would be allocated in the following order. The first $500 million would be dedicated to an equalization assistance fund that can be used for implementation of the Common Core standards, teacher and principal evaluation, K-3, and move on when ready. The next $10 million would establish an education, learning, and accountability fund, which is mostly those funds will be used to establish a statewide data system for student information. The next $90 million would establish the Education Accountability and Learning Fund for performance pay. This pay would be broken down as follows: 50% for academic performance, 25% for parental satisfaction, and 25% for student engagement. The next $100 million would establish a state infrastructure fund for highways, streets, public transportation, and buildings. And as you can see, these areas are not related to education. The next $25 million would establish a children's health insurance fund, also known as Kids Care. The next $100 million, a human services self-sufficiency fund to help nonprofits to serve needs of children, families, and vulnerable adults, another area that's not directly related to education. The next $50 million would establish funds for university scholarships, operations, and infrastructure fund to augment current scholarship monies. And then the next $125 million, and I believe all this adds up to $1 billion, would be set aside to fund an inflationary increase to the K-12 funding formula, which is the base support level that would increase our M&O funding. There's a lot more on Prop 204. If the monies would exceed the $1 billion, then there's a whole other list, like the one I just mentioned, as far as how those monies would be broken down. But I felt it was important to provide to you a little bit of information as far as what we're looking at. We anticipate that this would increase the per pupil funding about $528, between $528 and $600. So the conservative number is $500 additional per student. Unweighted count. So November 6th is a big day for education, and we ask that you please make sure that you vote, and voice your opinion. Any questions? Comments?
I have one question, Mr. Chair. Carla, the carryover balance you say is now projected to be 400,000 versus the million that we had hoped for. Could you explain why that is your projection, why what has changed since we last looked at that?
Well, for many years, we've been able to sustain a $1 million carryover from year to year. But, as the budget is proposed and adopted by the governing board, there are certain items that, that we present to the governing board, like salary increases, health insurance increase, other areas of the budget. And at one point, once you start using up your carryover, the carryover starts declining. And I just don't believe that we'll be able to make our $1 million the way the budget is looking at this point in time. And again, this is just a very, very rough estimate. Of course, I would try to do everything possible to maximize the carryover, to minimize the impact to next year's budget. But at this point, I just don't believe I can commit to having that $1 million carryover.
But the expenditures that we were looking at obviously encompassed the raise and whatever else we needed to pay for, and we were still hoping to have the $1 million left. So I still don't understand. I mean, are we spending something that we didn't discuss or think about or look at, or something's changed versus what we adopted?
Well, the biggest item that I believe has changed is a decline in revenues, especially in the area of grants. And it's not necessarily like your Title I grants or Title II, but mostly like in Medicaid, that revenues did not come in as we anticipated, and some of those costs need to be absorbed elsewhere. So transportation, you will see an increase when we do a budget revision in December in the area of transportation that Medicaid can no longer sustain. Some of the salaries in that as well will have to be absorbed in the M&O budget. Well, without the budget proposal in front of me and without more information, I would rather just come back and give you that information, Mr. Arana, if you would allow me.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's all, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Steve? That's good. All right. Next item
Thank you, Carla.
would be the consent agenda. Approval of routine warrants, purchase orders, travel claims, and employee leave and transfer requests and employee resignations. Any matter on the consent agenda will be removed from the consent agenda and discussed as a regular agenda item upon the request of any board member. A, approval of September 10, 2012 regular board meeting minutes, September 24, 2012, and October 1st, 2012 study session minutes. B, ratification of expense payroll vouchers. C, ratification of student activities auxiliary operations vouchers. D, approval acceptance of donation from Tucson Conquistadors Foundation. E, approval acceptance of donation from Santa Cruz County Attorney's Office. F, approval of Heritage Grant, Diamondback Grant. G, NUSD Gifted Scope and Sequence 2012-2013. H, approval of resolution for request for proposal for wide area network and internet services. I, personnel agenda summary. J, addenda positions for school year 2012-2013.
I'd like to have set aside for discussion item J, addenda positions for school year.
Mr. Chairman, I'd request F, G, H, and I.
All right.
F,
we'll
G, H, and I.
entertain a motion to approve items A through E.
So moved.
So, second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Start with F, approval of Heritage Grant, Diamondback Grant.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just, Mr. Superintendent Zimmerman, I'm just asking for an explanation of those two grants, please. I think the public would be interested in this, too.
Let's start with the Heritage Grant. A couple of months ago, representatives of the Cabot Cedric Foundation came to us, and Mr. Zimmerman and I met with them. And we had to be the applier for the grant because it had to be a public entity like Nogales. And we applied for this grant. Basically, what it will fund is two areas. One is those wetlands by Meadow Hills as you drive in. It will update those, create like a nature conservatory there. They want to establish a turtle sanctuary. And then also enhance the Santa Fe Ranch as an ecological center. Now, the benefit to Nogales Unified School District is a couple-fold. One is this grant will fund what they call guides, and the guides actually have math and science activities in them. So students can go and measure rainfall, measure the depth, count birds. There's other things that they can do. And the nice thing about this is we already got the matching funds. So if the grant itself does not come through, we're still going to be able to go on some of these field trips. We're still going to have some of the activities. We won't have the nature guide. We won't have the little workbook. Okay? But we're real pleased to be partnered with this, and I can see with many of you have the strong interest in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. My insistence was the lessons apply to STEM, and they agreed to do that. Okay. Are there any questions on the Heritage Grant before we go to the Diamondback Grant? Okay. The Diamondback Grant was something that Dr. Verona sent me in an email, was attached to I guess a newsletter that he gets. And I opened it up, and it said schools can apply for $5,000 from the Arizona Diamondback baseball team, and they would fund programs up to $5,000. I called Miss Montiel and asked if I could use Carpenter and apply in her name. for their Think College program. The reason I picked that for me to write up and apply to was that it affects so many students, Desert Shadows, Carpenter, the high school, Pearson, because all these students come together in the summer for this program that Greta Solanop, who is Lisa's daughter, started last year, bringing down 7 or 8 of her companions from Harvard. We wrote it up, and we were successful. Out of 600 applicants, they picked 25. And that grant was successful. I know a couple of the other principals submitted grants, and they got a nice letter that said, try again. Now, what this grant is going to allow us to do, and I talked to the lady today on the phone, Friday they cut the check, so we're going to get the check early. We're going to have Greta write up a proposal. I already have the proposal. And now she's going to be able to order supplies, plane fare, food, field trips, whatever she wants. She wanted to add an ACT, SAT study session to this week, and she can now purchase those kind of books to that as well. A second thing with this Diamondback grant is we get 1,000 tickets to the game where we are honored. And the woman said that, the lady that I talked to today, her name is Tara, said that of the 25 schools, they'll pick 5 games, and 5 schools will be honored before the game itself starts. And we'll look at dates and things for that. And that myself and Miss Montiel will be asked to come down to the field along with 2 representatives from each of the 5 schools to be honored as a award-winning school in the state. I have already, when I first heard this, said 1,000 tickets to a baseball game is very nice. How do we get the kids there? So this happened during the break. I already solicited, we already have 6 buses donated at $250 to $300 a bus. And I'll work on more if I can do that. But if we can get the buses donated and we've got the tickets, Carla and I talked about, depends on what time the game is. We might even be able to get a sack lunch from the food services to cover that, but we'll see how that goes. Okay. Any questions on the Diamondback grant? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for the approval of the Heritage Grant and the Diamondback Grant as presented and recommended.
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Item G, is there a motion?
He made a motion for both.
No, item G, the NUSD.
Oh,
Move to approve the NUSD Gifted Scope and Sequence 2012-13.
I second.
Discussion.
Just under discussion, Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Scott, under identification, I notice here for the middle schools, just this language is a little disturbing. It says gifted students are automatically enrolled in our advanced advisory classes. If additional space is available, highly excelling students are determined by the gifted exam. So if there are students to be in there, then we don't make any arrangements for them. They only can get in if space is available?
I handed this brochure, this matrix out to the principals, and they did the wording. I think that's true, Dr. Verona, even unfortunately at the high school. If you've got 4 sections of honors freshmen, and they already have 36, 37 in the class, which is already a couple over, there reaches a point where you have to say, there is no more room, okay? My understanding is, though, that what you call the honors advisory is not in place at either middle school at this point, okay? So I'd have to ask Mr. Barajas, I don't think you still have the honors advisory. Okay, that's one thing that we will amend in there, okay? Because I think in one place we took it out, but we'll have to amend that in there. So all the advisories are equal.
It's a great concern that our students who are highly excelling are being denied an opportunity because of space, something that maybe in the future the superintendent can address. Also, on page 12 there, Mrs. Scott, where it says how have your training events targeted the needs of administrators, counselors, psychologists, and support staff? And there's a paragraph here that says no specific training geared specifically in high school staff members were offered. Administrators and staff members involved in professional development are listed above. However, principal, head counselor attend college board in-services where they receive information and training on college entrance tests as well as pre-AP offerings and requirements, IB, AP, and similar topics. Well, the college board offers services only for the college board and the SAT exam. There's another board that offers the ACT and the pre-ACT and advanced placement. And IB has nothing to do with a college board. So I'm confused. How do you attend a college board conference and get all of this information there?
Well, I do know the middle schools are now doing what's called the Explore test, which is the pre-ACT, and we did go to training for that. They're having meetings for that. So that is covered as far as the ACT as well.
No, but this is for high school staff members.
Right. Again, Ms. Bonias is here. She's the one that submitted that paragraph.
Dr. Varona, at the most recent College Board presentations that we have been at as administrators, they are talking about the IB. Because now that we're going to the Common Core standards, IB is very much to Common Core and AP is trained to make the switch. So although the training is not specified into the International Baccalaureate program, there is a highlight to how the IB and the AP will be transitioning into Common Core, and so we do receive both those trainings. I do know that with the advanced placement, College Board oversees it, and then International Baccalaureate is a separate entity, but they are trying to work hand in hand so they can both transition into the Common Core standards.
Thank you, Ms. Bonias.
You're welcome.
And on the final one, Ms. Scott, on the program assessments there, where it talks about what are your key indicators that your program is positively affecting students, I didn't find anything that indicates the letter grades nor the score that they should get to indicate that it's positive, the programs are positively affecting students.
Again, I took whatever the principal sent me and put it together, but Dr. Verona, I believe that that would have to be a longitudinal study, and in order to be scientifically relevant, it would have to compare them before they got into honors until after they got into honors. And so, I mean, I'm saying it can't be done, but if you want to see if being in an honors class improves their grade point average or their scores on the aims, I will tell you that when I was at the high school, we looked at that very closely, at how many excelled, and then looked at how many of those excelling students were enrolled in honors sophomore English. That was one thing that we looked at to see how the counts were there. And just let me interrupt just a minute. Ms. Montiel came over and wanted me to say that at Carpenter, they do make room. If someone wants it, they just make sure that they place them. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's good. Thank you, Mrs. Montiel. I'm still thinking that if you're going to have something that, under program assessment, to assess the programs, the effectiveness of how it's positively affecting students, that all the work that we do to concentrate on the letter grade and the scores of the letter grade should be a part of this.
Do you mean the letter grade for the school itself, like an ABC, or do you
Yes.
mean a letter grade for the individual student?
No, for the letter grade for the school.
Okay.
There's nothing in here that, it's
No.
just like all of the work that we've done and all the accolades that we give our schools and the scores, and here we're talking about something we gotta give to the district that asked that, and there's nothing in there.
I can add that very easily because this has not been submitted yet. It's not approved. I'd be glad to add something about the letter grades. I'll be glad to add something about room will be made. Okay, I can modify that comment. Okay. And I can also modify the comment that, Ms. Bonias, if you send me that explanation, I'll add that in. Okay. One of the interesting things about this document is it doesn't only go to the State Department of Education, it goes to the Arizona School Board. I'm not quite sure why they would want
I don't
all of this,
think-
but they do.
I don't think the Arizona School Board Association would know what to do with the document.
It just says you must mail a copy to one and a copy to the other.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Any other discussion? all in favor of item G, say aye.
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 Approved. Item H, is there a motion?
Move to approve item H.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent Zimmerman, on the agenda item summary, I'm just confused on one thing here on the third paragraph. It says there on the middle of the third paragraph, request for proposals for these services. Because of the nature of the services being procured, it is the opinion of the district administration that the competitive sealed bidding process to procure such services is neither practical nor advantageous to the school district. I don't know what that means. Are we going out for bid or are we not going out for bid? What does this sentence have to do with that?
Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Different type of bid.
We're just trying to clarify that the method of procurement that will be used will be a request for proposal, where price is not the sole factor in determining the award. With requests for proposals, you have more flexibility because you have to take into account the service that is being provided. Of course, cost is always a factor, especially, when we have to work with E-rate funding in this instance. There's another entity that oversees this process as well. And that's a whole separate process that needs to be followed as far as filing 470 forms and doing the awards and that extensive process with that. But again, all we're trying to clarify through this resolution that has to be approved by the governing board is that we're not using a bid, we are using a request for proposal.
Okay, well, the only thing is, Mr. Chairman, Superintendent Zimmerman, is I hope that the high price is not a part of the consideration, and I hope this isn't something that we're trying to maneuver ourselves into to awarding it to the same person who has the contract right now.
Absolutely not.
No, we will have a committee that will review and score the proposals without even taking price into consideration initially. They have to look at what type of service is being provided, whether it's something that we need here at NUSD. There's a scoring rubric that's used for that, and then they also use the cost as the deciding factor at the end to make a recommendation. And again, it's up to the governing board to make the final decision on that.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Soto, but I noticed that there's two columns there, that there's one column for the E-rate pricing and another one for the school district pricing. So it could be that the school district, in case E-rate couldn't cover it, that we would have to cover it?
Correct. And I think a better answer could be provided. We have some people here visiting with us today. We have Mr. Ernie Nicely, who's with Nicely Done Consulting. And we also have Alex Lopez, our technology director, that could best answer that for you, if you'd like to.
And while they're walking up here, I want to say that because we've had quite a few meetings regarding this issue, and I want to assure the board and the community that we're trying to get the best service, the best bang for the dollar. We are not married to the wireless and the trillion poles that are outside. We are not married to having cable. We are going to go through the process and see what best fits our needs at the best price possible. So we have no marriage to anyone at this point.
Does that take into consideration that if we were to change to a different provider, all of the additional costs that would be associated with putting up separate service
That will be
poles
factored in probably into the decision, but we're going to be, as we have been, fiscally responsible to the Nogalians and the taxpayers, so we will factor in everything. But ultimately, we want to provide the best services possible. And but just for the good of this meeting, I just want to assure everyone that whether it is cable, whether it's them taking down poles, or whether or not we continue, we are not married to any of it.
And to clarify further on that, the column for the NUSD cost is because there could be some construction costs that are not E-rate eligible, so the district will have to bear on that full amount. As Mr. Zimmerman said, we are not married to our current vendor, so we are opening up the bid to all soliciting vendors, and we don't know what type of technology we're gonna be receiving, either fiber, underground fiber, aerial fiber, or wireless. We're not sure at this point. We don't have any information. But we're just requesting your approval to proceed with the RFP. And that's why we have two columns for the district cost and the E-rate cost.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lopez, does that mean that the consultant is the one who's drafting the RFP? You're putting that together? And you're not getting any suggestions from any of the vendors?
No. Our
Okay,
consultants
yeah.
help us to make sure that all the forms are properly inputted in the system through USAC and E-rate, and that we follow all the FCC rules that we need to be followed.
And that consultant has nothing to do with any potential vendor? He's
Nothing.
independent of all of them?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Any
Mr.
more
Chairman, just a real quick question. Isn't it 90% of the money that we use in this area come from the E-rate grant? I mean, our participation is very small, is it not?
It varies between 86 to 90% depending on our free and reduced lunch application percent that
So
we
we're,
receive
so
from
we're
the students.
basically asking for this alternative bidding process to identify the best vendor at hopefully the best price for our 10%.
Correct.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Any more discussion? All in favor of approving item H, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Item I, personnel agenda summary. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the personnel agenda summary as presented.
I second.
Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. I was going to say Mrs. Lopez, Mrs. Zuniga. There was just an item there that there was a legal agreement. And I noticed that the legal agreement, if it is a legal agreement for departure, they talk about attorneys, but I didn't see any signatures of the attorneys, of one, at least our attorney on there, so that I feel comfortable that our attorney reviewed it, signed off on it, in case something happens and none of us are on the board anymore, we know who the attorney is. And I just can't support it if it doesn't have, I concur with your recommendation. But if there's no attorney signature on it, I just don't like to get involved if I don't see the attorney's signature as approved as to form.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Varona, Mr. Zimmerman, members of the board, typically that's just the way that the procedure goes. Typically, the attorneys draft the agreement. There was an attorney on the employee's side, and then there was an attorney representing the district. And the agreement is really between the employee and the board. So the employee signs it. All of it is based on legal advice. And once, if you do decide to approve it, once you approve it, someone will sign on behalf of the district, and then it's a binding agreement. But typically, we don't have the attorney signing because that's not who's entertaining or who the agreement is for.
But they
So
brought
I
it
can
up.
attest to you that both attorneys weighed in on the agreement and that it was satisfactory to both parties, to the employee and to the district. I hope that satisfies. The employee, by accepting it, decided to voluntarily enter into the agreement with the district if the district chooses to accept, the agreement.
Mr. Zimmerman, what's your opinion?
I've seen it go both ways, and I can tell you here in Nogales, since I've been here, we've done it exactly that way, and the superintendent is the one that signs off guaranteeing that both are done. But I can tell you that I have been involved where it's happened both ways. We've gotten both signatures. I can tell you in this particular case that there are really no issues of concern. It has been pretty much clear, and it was done very quickly. But my opinion is always probably better to have some cover, some backup. But I can, at least in regards to the governing board, I think you're on solid ground, and I think the district's on solid ground.
Well, I can go ahead, Mrs. Zuniga, and concur with both of your opinions, but I would like just that as the superintendent puts out, additional ground coverage on this. I don't see any problem with those attorneys signing that they approved as to form, instead of having to have, hey, I didn't write that, or something like that. This way, they signed off, and they approved of it.
Absolutely, thank you for that comment. We'll make sure that for the next agreement that we bring forward to the board, that we have the employee signing it and both attorneys' signature for form to bring to the governing board for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Zuniga.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, and it's important to make that distinction, when the attorney is signing, our attorney is signing as approving it as to form, it's not as to substance. It's
Correct.
not the attorney's opinion that we should or should not enter into the agreement,
Right.
but rather that the form of the agreement is appropriate to what the agreement wants to do. So, it's not like we're getting a blessing from the lawyer to go ahead, but rather he's all right with the form. The only blessing can come from us as to whether the terms of the agreement are acceptable or not. I honestly, because we don't participate in those negotiations, my question would be, is it our attorney's recommendation that we accept the agreement? Because we did not participate in its formation. So I'm not so concerned about approval as to form, but rather to follow our lawyer's recommendation. Is the lawyer recommending to the district that we enter into the agreement? That's what I want to know.
Well, I think I can answer on behalf of the attorney because I had the most conversations probably, and I would say yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, just one final comment. I was asking for it to be approved as to form, and if there's going to be any, since I also do not participate in that, that is the responsibility of the superintendent of schools. I'm not interested in the attorney's recommendation. I'm interested in our superintendent of schools' recommendation. That's your responsibility to talk to the attorneys and come back to us, because you're the one who's going to be accountable, not the attorney.
And I can tell you, normally in these type of personnel issues, I have been involved, probably not to the extent as Mrs. Zuniga, but I certainly have had my discussions. I feel very confident in signing off on this particular issue, on this case.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield to the recommendation of the superintendent.
Any more discussion? All in favor of passing item I, say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Item J, addenda positions for school year 2012-2013. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to approve.
Second?
Discussion?
Mrs. Zuniga,
Yes, ma'am.
tell me, how is it that we can now afford to hire back 5 or 6 physical education teachers that we had to let go? And being that Mr. Rana brought forth the issue earlier of not having the, as high a rollover from one year to the next, are we pulling funds from there?
Mrs. Suarez, since I'm not the financial guru, I'll have Ms. Soto come up and join me, but I can tell you that all 6 of those positions will be funded through a grant, through the PEP grant, and that's a 3-year continuing grant. And I believe it's for $300,000 per year to cover the salaries of these PE/nutrition teachers. And I just made a clarification because I had a typo in the grid, and I gave you all a revised copy of that. So I figured that there may be some questions about that, but I definitely am not the finance person. The recommendation does state, however, that we work collaboratively to make sure that, on one end, we have the HR items covered, and then on another end, that we have all of the financial items covered. So if Ms. Soto would like to join me.
Well, I have another question for you, in that, for those physical education teachers that we are going to bring on board,
Yes, ma'am.
I assume you're in the process of identifying who they're going to be.
That's correct.
Are we giving them the advance notice that this position, depending on whether the grant renews after 3 years, that it is a 3-year stint? It's not something that, that we can, say this is a lifelong commitment to this hiring, even though we do contracts each year, that we can only put forth an opportunity for 3 years?
I'll answer that. First, let me tell you, we're very thankful that we are getting most of the grant. It's Mr. Velasquez in his office wrote the PEP grant. We are the beneficiaries, and out of the significant portion, about $300 and some thousand, is good for 3 years. In their contract, it will stipulate that the position is only good for 3 years. And then we'll just sort of wait and see what happens 3 years from now. Currently, the requirements are a little bit different. It's not just someone who has a PE credential, because there's a component that talks about health, nutrition. There have been some individuals who are PE teachers before that have come forth wanting those to be considered. At this point in time, I think we've only filled one. We have applicants. We actually had a meeting before this meeting, Ms. Zuniga and I, just to make sure that we are getting the right people in there. We don't want to take away a highly qualified at this point in time from the classroom and fill that with a substitute. So we've all agreed, at least with the elementary principals, that we wouldn't do that. So we are sort of slow playing the hiring of this. We know that we'd like to get those individuals into those positions, not only for the kids, but also that it creates another special for planning for the elementary teachers. So.
And just to add to that, if you noticed, I also gave each of you a copy of the job description. And in the purpose statement, the last sentence includes that the position is grant funded for the period from August 2012 through July 2015. That's also in the job announcement, so applicants coming in already know that this is a grant funded position. And we really want the community and everyone to know that this is really not something that's just going to be what we had before, but a new program that has much more than what we used to have for PE. And that's more, that the content is more significant, and that it's a little bit different. We hope that it will
And the
continue.
county does have a PEP director that they hired and an assistant to make sure that the guidelines and the scope of the grant is being followed. That does not mean that they are in charge of the PE teachers at the school sites, because that's ultimately the principal's responsibilities, and they've been made aware.
Okay. Carla, is any additional funding going to be necessary to support these positions?
No, like Ms. Zuniga said, we received word after the budget was adopted that the Santa Cruz County School Superintendent's Office was awarded the PEP grant, of which would allocate some funding to our school district in the amount of $300,000 per year to fund one PE teacher at each of our elementary schools. And that would sustain those positions. The other positions that are listed in this list, we did reduce 2 teachers at the elementary level to be able to place the elementary 3rd grade position at Bracker and the elementary 5th grade position at Lincoln in the M&O budget. And in the other 2 positions that are listed on there would be instructional aides. Bracker was allotted an additional instructional aide because of the class sizes in the kinder area through Title I funds. And Lincoln Elementary School also had some concerns in their grade levels and their class sizes, and they wanted to maintain an intervention aide in the grade levels of K-3, and they're supporting that through their Title I funding as well.
I have no more discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to bring out just 2 concerns. First of all, we did approve this grant as a board, and we spent a lot of time listening to Mrs. Scott and Mr. Velasquez coming before us to give us a scope and sequence of this entire grant. So this has been board approved. And also, I was going to make a comment to the Superintendent Zimmerman that I think it's kind of unfair that we tell these people that they can only be hired for 3 years, that I, for one, am committed for you to find the financial resources for them to continue. But after listening to the presentation, Mrs. Soto's presentation on budget forecast presentation, I guess our financial resources are on limbo until after November the 6th. so I won't make that comment until, but I just wanted to tell you that, but I also wanted you to know that we spend a lot of time discussing this at a board meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Action items. A, approval fiscal year 2011-2012 school district annual financial report.
I guess, there's really no presentation unless you would like one.
This is just, Mr. Chair, this is just a presentation of our final adjusted last year budget
Yes.
to adjust to actual amounts.
Yes, the annual financial report is a report that we must submit to the Department of Education by October the 15th. And it reflects the latest revised budget from last year, and all the final expenditures and all the accounts have been reconciled with our county treasurer. And it also includes other information that is gathered for indirect cost purposes, for grant purposes, and items of that nature.
Sounds
But,
like we're in trouble if we don't do it today, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we did not have another governing board meeting. The last one we had was in September, and I did not have the software to be able to do the report at that time. So yes, it must be approved today, but if you have a concern on it, I can address it either today or at a later time.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for the approval of the 2011-2012 school district annual financial report.
I second the motion.
Any more discussion?
Just under the discussion, you said, I noticed when I was reading it, you said that the report had to be published. Where are you going to publish this report?
We put a link on our website to the Arizona Department of Education website, and it for the taxpayers that are interested in looking at our report, all they have to do is click on the link, and it takes them directly to the Department of Ed website, where any other financial report would be listed for the school districts in the state of Arizona.
Just as one person, Superintendent Zimmerman, there's a lot of people in our community that don't have access to a computer and all of that, and I just feel that especially our financial report and our budget should be published in the newspaper.
I mean, we can certainly do that, with direction from the governing board.
Any more discussion?
No, Mr. Chairman, can you give some direction if we want to put this to be published into the newspaper so more of our community knows what we're doing? They left it to us. I think it should be up to the superintendent of schools, but I would prefer that the superintendent make the decision.
If it's in our budget.
If it's in our budget.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll place
that's
it.
Do
I'll
whatever
put
you
it in the
decide.
international.
And can I just add, would that only be the summary? Because this is a rather long report. And the summary is really what is required to be published. In the past, we used to publish in a newspaper, but now you suffice that requirement by posting on a website. But I understand your point, Dr.
That
Varela.
would be a thick newspaper with everything in it, if that's the wish. If you want the summary, that would probably,
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent Zimmer, I'm just looking for the public to have knowledge, and if they want more information, they know where to go for the people who don't have computer access. That's all I'm looking for, so that the public has some form of knowledge of it. Whatever your decision is, I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts. That's not for me to be doing as a board member. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Any more discussion?
No.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes. Action item B, policy D, 2340, DICA fund balances reporting.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that policy D, 2340, DICA fund balance reporting be passed and adopted as presented, and that the second waiving be also approved.
Second,
I second that.
any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. All right, no need for executive session. Item 10, governing board future requests. Any requests?
Mr. Chairman, just one item, Superintendent Zimmerman, please, if you could just give us I was reading in the Arizona Republic that there's some high schools that are involved with Move On with Ready, and I noticed that the Rio Rico High School is involved in that. And just if you could give us a presentation on that program, why are they involved in that and we're not involved in that?
I have one, Mr. Chair, just bringing up again, I'd like to see the budget for our grant monies, see how we're spending our grant money, or propose to spend our grant money.
Okay. Entertain a motion for adjournment?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Kathy,